Jake, Lisa, and Mark stood at the edge of Black Hollow Forest. A weathered sign warned, "Turn back." Legends whispered of lost souls and eerie cries in the night. But the friends, seasoned hikers, scoffed.
Just stories.
Jake chuckled, shouldering his pack. Lisa, ever practical, checked their supplies. Only Mark hesitated, his gaze drawn to the swirling fog at the forest's edge.
Let's stick together,
he murmured, more to himself than the others. Jake slapped his back.
Relax, mate. We'll be out before sunset.
And with that, they plunged into the woods. The forest swallowed them whole, as if it had a life of its own. A dark, insatiable hunger that consumed everything in its path. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and flickered like ghostly apparitions. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Each breath felt like inhaling the essence of the forest's ancient secrets. The silence was unnerving. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, only the echo of their own footsteps on the damp earth. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting.
Beautiful, yet creepy. The forest was a paradox, a place of stunning natural beauty that masked an underlying sense of dread.
Lisa pointed out strange fungi, their luminescent glow casting an otherworldly light. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, adding to the forest's eerie ambience. She whispered, a shiver running down her spine. The forest seemed to amplify her fear, making every sound, every shadow a potential threat. Mark nodded, unable to shake the feeling of unseen eyes watching their every move. The sensation was palpable, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The forest seemed to close in around them, its dark embrace tightening with every step. It felt like the forest itself was closing in, suffocating them with its unseen presence. Every rustle, every creak was a reminder that they were not alone in Black Hollow. Hours crawled by. The trail, faint to begin with, became increasingly difficult to follow. Mark, leading the way, stopped short, frowning.
Look at this,
he muttered, pointing to a tree. Carved into its bark was a strange symbol, a circle with 3 claw marks beneath it. It looked fresh, stark against the weathered wood.
What is that?
Lisa breathed, her voice barely a whisper.
Probably kids messing around?
Jake said, though his tone lacked conviction. They continued, but the symbol appeared again and again, carved into trees, etched into rocks. Each mark sent a chill down their spines, a silent message from something unseen. They were being watched. He said, but even he sounded unsure. The forest seemed to close in around them, the darkness pressing against their senses. The sound came again, closer this time, a heart-wrenching wail that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the forest. It was a cry of pure anguish, echoing through the trees. It was not the cry of an animal. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, was eerily silent. It was something far more human, far more disturbing. The realization sent a shiver down their spines as they stood rooted to the spot, unable to move. Fear lent them a new urgency. They pressed on, desperate to escape the growing darkness and the chilling sound that seemed to follow them.
Then through the trees, a flicker of movement.
A pale figure, almost translucent, standing motionless in the fading light. Lisa gasped, clutching Jake's arm.
What is that?
She breathed, her voice trembling. As they watched, the figure moved, gliding silently towards them, its feet seeming not to touch the ground. It was a woman, her long white dress billowing around her like a shroud. Her face was hidden in shadow, but even in the dim light they could sense a deep, profound sadness emanating from her. The woman stopped a few feet from them, her head bowed. They could hear her now, her soft sobs echoing their own growing terror.
Who are you?
Mark asked, his voice hoarse. The woman didn't respond. She simply raised her head, and for the briefest of moments the moonlight illuminated her face. It was a face etched with sorrow, her eyes hollow pits of despair. Then, just as quickly, she was gone, melting back into the shadows as if she were never there. The silence returned, heavier, more oppressive than before. They were alone, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, intensified. Panic set in. They ran stumbling through the undergrowth, desperate to escape the nightmare that had engulfed them. The forest seemed to twist around them, every path leading to nowhere.
Lisa!
Jake cried out, realizing his friend was no longer beside him. They circled back, hearts pounding, calling her name until their voices were raw. But there was no answer, only the echo of their own fear in the deepening twilight. Lisa had vanished, swallowed whole by the forest, leaving no trace behind except for a faint lingering scent of lavender, Lisa's favorite perfume, hanging heavy in the air. Night had fallen, a moonless night shrouded in an unnatural darkness. Jake and Mark, exhausted and terrified, stumbled aimlessly through the woods. The forest was alive with sounds now. Whispers slithered through the trees, branches reached out like skeletal fingers, and the mournful cries seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were lost, hopelessly lost in a labyrinth of fear.
We're going to die here.
Mark muttered, his voice thick with despair. Jake sank down beside him, his own hope dwindling with each passing moment. They were trapped at the mercy of something ancient and evil.
Echoed through the clearing, filled with a mix of desperation and hope.
Jake shouted, relief flooding through him. He had found They were the whispers of the forest, the whispers of the fog, promising oblivion. The fog seemed to pulse with a life of its own. wrapping around them like a cold embrace. And as Jake and Mark watched in horror, Lisa turned, her face a mask of eerie serenity, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a sight that would haunt them forever. They were the last things Jake and Mark ever saw before the fog closed in, swallowing their screams, their fear, their very existence. The forest returned to its silent vigil, the whispers fading into the night.